Being neglected or abused as a child appears to increase your risk of stroke later in life, and it also can impact your risk for other illnesses. And we've asked Dr. Dianne McCallister, our regular contributor, to talk about this new study with us today. So welcome, Dianne.
Thank you.
How did the researchers make this connection between abuse or neglect and stroke later in life?
Well, interestingly, there's been growing evidence that there is a link between emotional abuse and physical symptoms. So what these researchers did is they polled about just over 1,000 adults 55 and over, and then watched them over a period of 3.5 years to see what health problems they developed.
And they looked for more than just stroke, didn't they?
They did. They looked at other risk factors such as heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and then things like smoking, physical activity, and diet. And then what they did is they asked the people they polled 4 questions. One was, did you feel loved by your caregiver? The second one was, did you feel intimidated or afraid when you were a child? The third was, did you ever get hit with an object? And finally, they looked into financial and divorce kind of stresses.
So how much did the emotional neglect or abuse impact the child? How were they able to quantify that?
You know, what they did is they followed stroke rates, and interestingly, even after factoring for all the risk factors for stroke, people who had had moderately high levels of stress as a child were 3 times more likely to have a stroke than people who had had moderately low levels of stress, emotional neglect as a child.
3 times as high. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it?
That's very significant.
Yeah, so what should our viewers take away from this information? They're always coming out with new studies and findings. What do we learn from this particular one?
So this one isn't a cause and effect necessarily, so we don't know why it was caused, probably due to the stress from the emotional neglect. But number one, we as adults are responsible for the children in our lives and around our lives. If you know of a child that's being neglected, you really need to report it to the authorities so the family and the child can get help. Secondly, if you were a victim of being neglected as a child, there are things you can do now to take care of yourself. You may need counseling. That can help you learn to forgive and decrease your stress level now, which will help you going forward. And finally, children need emotional support, and we don't have to be their parents. So volunteer, read at a school, volunteer as a Sunday school teacher, do something to provide emotional support to the children in your area.
And there are so many not-for-profit organizations in our area. There are lots of opportunities for volunteering. I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yes, it's so important, you know, boys, girls clubs. There's so many things we can do. We don't have to be the parents.
Absolutely, and don't underestimate the impact of stress. Thank you, Dr. Dianne McCallister. She's the Chief Medical Officer at Centura's Porter Adventist Hospital, and you can find today's information on thedenverchannel.com. Just look for the Lifestyle tab and click on Staying Healthy.